So, hi everybody. My name is Jonathan McMichael, and Megan Hewer is here with me, and we're going to be talking about why students struggle with college level research. And we had done one of these last semester in this same sort of series, and we thought it'd be we're going to cover some of that same material where we talk a little bit about what the library has to offer and what we can do to work with you on your research assignments. But we also thought we would sort of present and show maybe a little bit of what our expertise is and a little bit of where we think students struggle, and maybe hopefully a way to sort of think about student research assignments. We've got a lot of sort of discussion kind of in this workshop. So I thought there are going to be some places where we may be asking you some questions. So if you think about some of your research with students and where they get stuck and what challenges you face with that, that'll be really helpful for us to sort of facilitate a discussion. Megan, did I get it?
Yeah, and I was going to say it's an intimate group, so you can either ask questions or answer questions in chat, or feel free to unmic yourself. Since we're small, we're fine with it.
Yeah, you're not going to interrupt us. We'd prefer to hear what your concerns are and what you're experiencing, rather than just sort of rambling on. But we will hopefully offer some solutions and some ways to think about stuff. So yeah, this is who we are. This is our first slide. I mentioned that I'm the undergraduate success librarian, and Megan is the head of information literacy and research librarian. So, and we both work a lot with teaching students how to think about research and work a lot with classes. I work primarily with first-year students. So that's sort of our expertise. But we have a whole series of other librarians, and here at this link, you can go see all of our other librarians. We have people assigned by different subjects. And the class you're working with, if you were in an upper level class or working in a specific subject, we have a librarian who is assigned to work with you, and like sort of knows the areas that you're working in. So I'm going to talk about mental models today, and that's kind of going to be the approach that we're going to sort of talk about where students struggle and why students struggle. And so to do this, I'm going to give my definition. This is Jonathan's remix of Wikipedia definition of what a mental model is. So a mental model is an individual's representation of a complex system and a relationship between various parts. Mental models can sometimes help shape behavior and set approaches to problem solving and help us explain why things happen. So like the idea is that a lot of times students come in with these approaches or these models of how things work. And most students, so I'm gonna give you a quote here. Learners aren't blank slates. They come to us, they come to the learning situation with prior knowledge, experience, and quite possibly some misconceptions. Such misunderstandings, as opposed to confusion or inattention, typically flow from prior experience and plausible inference made upon that experience. So students are oftentimes making mistakes with their mental model because they're applying models that have worked before into other situations. And I think this is an important thing to realize, especially with research, because oftentimes I find that the best students struggle the most with research. And it's because they come up with these misconceptions and they start applying strategies and mental models that don't always apply. So let's think about what some of those might be. So research assignments are uniquely challenging. And I'm going to go through some of the examples of, this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but here are some of the mental models that lead students to kind of struggle with research, and I'll try to explain some of the behaviors we see because of these flawed sort of mental models or misapplied mental models. So one is the idea of scholarly research. So we oftentimes ask students to find scholarly research or find scholarly articles. And so there are many times, certainly with first years, that we see very often, they think of their scholarly research being the research paper that they are writing. And it's a product, a thing that they create or thing that they read. And so they think of the individual paper as scholarly research. Well, if you contrast that with people who have been in the scholarly world and the academic world for a while, we don't think of the individual paper as the thing of scholarly research. Instead, we're thinking of academic discourse. We're thinking about the discussion that happens between these papers, and that is what manufactures scholarly research. This small change between when a student kind of gets that they're writing to a larger conversation, it shifts the way they behave, it shifts the way they write a paper, it shifts the way they read a scholarly paper. And those things can lead students to really struggle, that they can look for more answers in a particular paper than might exist and not think, well, what other papers is this in conversation with? That's where an expert sort of thinks. A novice sort of thinks, well, I need to find the right paper to work. towards. So that is one example. Another one would be arguments, and I see this all the time. You see arguments, when you say the word argument, a student thinks they're either for something or they're against something. And so these for or against arguments are where a lot of people say, well, you need to put your argument. And so they end up writing like, I'm for this or I'm against this. Well, that's not exactly what we think about when we're sort of in the academic world. We think of arguments as new perspectives on a topic, changing of perspective, or changing or constructing meaning by putting a lot of different information together in a new way. They're looking for new ways. So this word argument, a flawed mental model to say, I'm going to be for something, therefore I find all the research that supports my argument, doesn't actually lead people to be very effective at doing research, because they start to have these biases where they're saying, well, this works for me and this doesn't. Instead of saying, I'm going to look at all the research and develop what I think is the appropriate way to think about this type of topic or what I'm studying. We can continue to go through. There are a few more. Project management. This is where like some of our best students tend to struggle. We oftentimes tell students they come in, the reason they got here is they were very good at keeping a plan. They said, this is the date I need to have something done. This is the date that I need to start writing. This is, that keeps them on schedule. Well, anybody who's done research enough, sometimes you can have the best laid plans and they're not going to work out, because also you have to follow your research question. Well, what if your research question requires you, 12 days to answer, or to really adequately research, and you don't know what's going to happen next? This uncertainty leads to a lot of anxiety, and then a lot of students try to control the research process by putting it on a schedule. And sometimes that leads them to say, well, I'm not writing yet, therefore I just need to stop and start writing, and they don't really have a full grasp of what's going on. So this project management mental model makes them struggle as well. We have a few more roles of students. They think that their goal is to meet expectations. Well, if you contrast that with become independent critical thinkers, well, sometimes those expectations, you don't know. Somebody can't give you the answer of what you should do. You need to be a critical thinker on your own, and that changes what the role of the student's going to be. We have a few more. The information systems, this is probably one that I see more often because I'm a librarian, is that a lot of students think, I'm only going to find the best sources. So that's their approach to navigating information systems. So they say, is this good or is this bad? Well, in actuality, there's more to it. These things are very complex. This is a representation of a discourse. So what keywords you use and how you filter those results can change what types of sources exist. And then good sources can be lots of different things depending on how you navigate that information system. And lastly, authority. We tell students to trust experts. We can say, oh, scholarly research, trust the experts. Well, that's all well and good until they have to write a scholarly research article, and then it's, well, you need to do empirical evaluation. You need to deconstruct the arguments of those experts and try to understand where they sort of fit. So this is kind of this is an abbreviated version of this. There's many more. The idea that I hope you get out of this is that students come with these ideas that have worked in the past, that if they meet expectations, have a plan, find good sources, and trust the experts, that has worked in lots of other situations and made them successful students. However, when they do research, these approaches lead them down paths where they can get really stuck or frustrated. So we're going to pause here. Are there any of these that stuck out to you to sort of say, well, I've seen some students do something like this, or that I've seen students engaging this type of thinking, and it's been hard for them to switch over to what we expect out of them with their research assignments?
I'm struck by, and looking at this again, how much of this is sort of coming to a kind of maturity in terms of understanding how we construct knowledge. And it's possible you may see students at different varying levels of this depending on where they are in their college career.
Yeah, I think the thing that I often think about is that these mental models are adaptive strategies. These are things that work to help them be successful in certain environments. And there's a few things that go on. Being successful in high school you don't use the same strategies to be successful in high school as you use to be successful in college. And certainly you don't use the same strategies as a student that you would as a professional researcher. Those start to shift, and those adaptive mental models need to shift with them. And I think instead of saying I really hesitate. Sometimes you'll catch me sometimes saying, I think these models are flawed. I don't think they're flawed in that I think they are effective in the circumstances that they're using them. It's just they're being presented with new context and they need to adapt. This is where the learning is happening. These are great things for them to be experiencing, to say, you know what, I do need to become a better independent critical thinker, or I need to understand what it feels like to follow a research question rather than just have a plan. But these things can get in the way of what you might see with the final product, or that somebody might get stuck.
So one thing that I've seen, I'm a professor of counseling, and my students are graduate students, so not undergrad. So it's a little bit, I came here because my students, even in graduate school, struggle with research. And what you've just said really applies. I'm thinking of one particular student who said to me last semester, we had an assignment that said, you must use at least 5 peer-reviewed articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, which, is scholarly research. And she used just a website. And I said, and so in her feedback, I gave her feedback that said, you didn't use 5 peer-reviewed journal articles. And then she responded and said, well, I was told this is peer-reviewed. So even that understanding of what is peer-reviewed, what meets that rigor, what meets that standard that we have set is, they like you mentioned, they have these preconceived notions of, oh, well, this is what my teacher or my previous professor told me. And then when they have someone say, oh no, and especially on feedback, right? So they've done their assignment already. It can be pretty, I don't know, it's disruptive, I guess, especially for those that are so high achieving, like you said, and they struggle with, oh my goodness, I didn't meet a particular standard. What does this mean?
Yeah, you hear this very often with students, this notion that I'm going to go back to what I'm going to argue through what my mental model is. So I can hear with this student and say, well, I met the expectations as I understood those to be, and that's my role as a student, right? And the thing that might lead to them overcoming something like that would be, okay, let's understand why why you would even recommend them in the first place, right? Like, if you start to integrate that to say, well, these types of sources work well for this type of research because they offer some sort of validity, or we understand the academic discourse, and this is the reason why I'm asking you to do that. Well, what ends up happening is they start to acclimate and change their mental model and can anticipate the feedback that you would have given them, right? If they can't anticipate the feedback you would have given them, when they get in a defensive stance to sort of say, well, hold on, I'm concerned what you're saying to me because you're going to give me a grade and I'm concerned about what that grade's going to be. You default back to what has worked in the past to say, this was my way of understanding it, versus sort of bringing them along and seeing that as a teachable moment to sort of say, hey, why you understood this to be peer reviewed. Let me explain to you why it doesn't meet the criteria for what we need it to do, right? And that's a larger conversation. And I think we see those as like kind of teachable moments.
Yeah.
That's a really good example.
And a related idea to that, evaluating information is so complicated and we all do it all the time. And so it's also helping students to see like the kind of quote code switching in terms of how you value information, and the student is becoming part of a profession that has sort of like, we have certain kinds of information that we value and this is why we value. So it's kind of becoming that, like learning how to create that identity as a scholar within a certain discipline and paying attention to those kind of things. So it's like a deeper thing there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, identity is a huge part. I mean, I'm going to move on because we're hitting on some of the points that I wanted to make within that. Can
I just say something really quickly, just because of what you said there? I do, in terms of identity and in terms of what we value as the way, the way to write, and you mentioned, Megan, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong. You mentioned code switching. So if a student writes with in a particular way, certainly, with colloquialisms or anything of that nature, and I mark that off as, or saying, hey, please, please note you're writing in an academic setting or something like that.
Right.
but I want to, my thought is, and I wonder about this too, in a world in which I want to value diversity, in which I want to honor backgrounds, where is my line there? So anyway, it's a philosophical question. It's a deep question, I think. But anyway, it's something that you just made me think of when you mentioned.
No, I think there's something to that, and I think there is the notion of that we expect certain behaviors or there's certain norms that are established. But I think those questions that especially with diversity issues, to sort of say like, hey, we should understand why we want those things, and do they just exist as a ritual or tradition within academia, because we have plenty of those. Or is there some sort of justification that we can sort of say, well, it's this way for these reasons? And if you can understand those reasons, you can then challenge them on a foundation to sort of say, I think there should be more colloquialisms in this context because of this reason. And if they can make that argument, that starts to sort of be like you have a mutually shared mental model of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that starts to be the foundation where you have that discussion.
And in terms of, and I know we're kind of running long on this, but it's an interesting thing. In terms of evaluating information, it's about bringing students into the fold of let's critically examine this together. Why does the counseling profession value these kind of things? But also, where might we need new ideas about how we evaluate and value the kind of information that we're using, or how we write about it, and sort of leaving that door open for that kind of critical analysis.
Well, and I think this gets into this point, is that oftentimes when we think of the product of research, we think of the product, we think of them creating the completed product. So this would be the final research paper, or them doing something at the end. And so oftentimes we write assignments based off this product. We want them to create this thing or that thing, and we want it to look a certain way and to look and have the hallmarks of what we think a research paper should look like. Well, that's very different than the process of research, which oftentimes to students looks like this, that they are very much stuck in the immediate obstacle that's right in front of them. And I can say from first-year students, and I think this happens in a lot of different classes, that they don't see the full process yet. They only see the thing that they're working on that's right in front of them, because they've not gone to the top to sort of say, I've completed the research process, and I have faith that my skills will carry me on to be at the end of this. So that I make the analogy of hiking up a hill here or going up a mountain here, that if you just start hiking, you can get halfway through a trail and say, this is really hard and I don't know if I'm going to complete this. And you can start to not trust your process, and you start thinking of individual obstacles. If you've done it a few times, that experience and that faith and that belief in yourself carries you through this. I would also say, as an instructor, if you only think of the product of research and don't think of the experience that students have while doing it, you're missing some of the obstacles that a lot of students are facing, and you're not there with them to help them overcome this one rock that's in their way that seems to be blocking them in that way. Instead, you're yelling them from the top of the mountain, saying, come on up here. And they're like, I'm stuck. I can't get past this thing. That's going to be really challenging. And so this helps me to be the analogy of sort of saying very often, prioritizing the process of research preserves the joy of that research. And I think this is a really important part, that like, I love research and I have really positive experiences. If I think of new information or doing research, keyword searching, all of that kind of stuff, helping students, it makes me happy to do it. I like doing it. Well, the reason is because I've had positive experiences with it. And these obstacles, I've overcome some challenges and feel confident in my ability to do that. Same thing with, I'm sure with all of you, you've fallen in love with some version of doing research or academia. And so this is Jerome Bruner, and he's one of my favorite people that's ever lived. But he has this really great quote: being able to go beyond the information given to figure things out is one of the few untarnishable joys in life. One of the great triumphs of learning and of teaching is to get things organized in your head in a way that permits you to know more than you ought to know. And this is where the joy of research comes. It doesn't come from that top of the mountain experience. It comes from overcoming these obstacles and saying, I like the process of doing research. And I think that's one thing that we want to make sure that we don't just completely smooth over the path and say, well, there's no way to fail on this research, just follow the path, because these obstacles are actually what make research enjoyable, even though they're the most frustrating parts of research. So I think that's one of the things that I always want to make sure that we're emphasizing, is that we're being true to what their authentic experiences are, and we're setting them up so that they can overcome those obstacles, but then feel the joy of research while they're doing it. So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit is how we sort of identify obstacles. And I'm going to sort of think about how we can place you guys in this process. So one of the things is, when you first started doing college level research, where did you get stuck? Is there a particular assignment that stuck out to you? Is there something that you did? And then how did you overcome that challenge? Do you may have an example that they can think of an obstacle when they first started? Go all the way back to when you were first doing this. What was that like? I think this is one of the challenges, because for example, I can think about, I had never read a scholarly article before, and so I didn't know how to read them. And so I didn't know what to look for. And I would read them straight line, and I would say, you know what? I don't understand most of these words, or I do understand these words in one context, but then I don't understand them on how they're using them. And I remember thinking, I'm not smart enough to understand these articles. I was not equipped to do this. And it wasn't, and I overcame that by I kept reading. I just didn't give up and I didn't let that, I'm not a very fixed mindset sort of guy. So I just said, I just need to read more of these things. And I started to learn and understand that. I didn't actually end up reading anything that told me how to read a scholarly article. I felt like I was cheating. I was like, I don't read the whole, I remember telling my friend, I don't read the whole thing. I just read the first part and the last part. And if I think it's interesting, I'll read the middle. And I was like, so I wouldn't admit to that for a long time, because I felt like I was telling my instructors I didn't actually read the article. I only looked at part of it. And then it wasn't until I started talking to other people and they started saying, yeah, that's what we all do. We just read, that's the way everybody reads it. That's how I read it too. And that helped me identify that was an obstacle, because I honestly thought I'm done with this. I'm not going to be able to finish this until I felt like I cheated my way through figuring out how to read a scholarly article. And that overcoming, now it's hard for me to remember what it was like not to be able to read a scholarly article. And I think that's a important thing to think about, is what were some of the challenges that you're facing? Now, certainly your students aren't going to face the same set of challenges. But we need to think about what the mental models that they're bringing to some of those challenges and how they might be exacerbating or contributing to making this an obstacle. So some of the common places you want to think about, these are some of the things I think about. Where are some of the common places your students get stuck? The scholarly article one is common still, and it's a thing that I can give advice on because I've experienced it before. But coming up with keywords is also very common. Not knowing what databases to use is very common.
Not knowing the scope of the research that's out there on a topic. So students will think what they're doing is very narrow, and you're like, let's look at how broad, how many people have written about this.
Right. That whatever question I have is the question I have to stick with for the rest of time, that I'm not allowed to change it based off of new information. These are places where students lead them to get stuck. And then how it affects their final product. There's plenty of ways in which this happens. If they don't do background research, for example, students chronically underestimate the need for encyclopedias and background information. And it's I'm supposed to find 5 scholarly sources or 5 peer-reviewed sources. I'll go find those sources. Whether they make sense to me or not, I've found the 5 sources I'm supposed to use. And by not understanding that they actually need to understand and connect all of them in a discourse and how they all fit together, that leads to the final product feeling very disjointed and just sort of a summary of everything that they found on its own terms, instead of the analysis that maybe the paper is supposed to provide. But that all goes back to, I was supposed to find 5 sources, and I didn't know that I was supposed to go figure out how they all fit together using my knowledge base. And then how might their mental model affect and contribute to these things that they're facing? So it's I think the important part that I would say is, the better you get at placing yourself into where the student is at, what the student is experiencing, the more effective you're going to be at anticipating why they're doing what they're doing. And so I give almost every student the benefit of the doubt to say, actually, you're probably struggling for what is a legitimate reason, and it's not your fault. You're just applying a model that is maybe not working here. Let's figure out how we can tweak that a little bit. And so these are some of the common ones. I gave some of these examples. Never ask for questions when they get stuck is a really good one. Fixating on choosing the best topic. These are the topic shoppers. The people goes around and say, is this the best topic? Could I choose a better topic? And they never go past the first phase. That's a common one too.
Commonly comes up in research consults with students. The second that the going gets a little tough, it's oh no, my topic's no good.
Yep.
It's oh, I can't do this topic. I've got to, find something else that's workable.
Yep, for sure. And so the next part then becomes bridging the gap between being a novice and being an expert. That we want them to start thinking like experts think, but they have to actually travel over the bridge that gets them to that place. You can't just say, behave like an expert, even though you don't understand what you're doing. that's not going to work because they're not going to anticipate what the next problem is going to be along their path. So one of the things that I often ask myself is to say, how would I get past the challenge they're facing? If I didn't feel comfortable with my topic, or if I didn't feel like I knew the keywords that were out there, those would be common things in which we would have solutions for, right? You know, the keyword problem might be, I'm going to go read some of the major journals and find some of the most common terms that come up often and make sure I understand those definitions. Now, does that work for a student? It might not, because they might not know what the major journals are. They may not know how to read those articles most effectively, and they may not have the knowledge base that you have that you're drawing from to help that make sense, right? And so the solutions you offer might come from a little bit of what you already know, and it's like, well, hold on, now I need to look at it from their perspective. What other ways might a student overcome the challenge? I think we get very prescriptive very often to say, you need to do it this way. And if I know anything about research, it's that there isn't one way to solve any research problem. There are many ways, and students often come up with the most creative ways to solve their own research problems. And so it's appreciating, is this working for you, and how is this changing the way you're making sense of this? And so sometimes just reflection, say, how are you thinking about this problem, and why do you think this solution might work? Helps you to get into their mindset a little bit more. And then why might those ways be obvious? And so the last one I would think of, can you think of circumstances in which what they're trying to do would work? Like making a plan makes a whole ton of sense for managing how you study for a test. It happens to not work so much because the student wants to skip the research part and go straight to writing because they're worried about, they see the blank screen and they're like, I'm not even written yet, so what am I going to do? And so they write their ideas down prematurely, and then they get too attached to that. They don't want to press the backspace button because they're like, it's supposed to be 4 pages and I've already written 2 pages. If I go back to 1 page, I'm now not close to where I think I should be, right? These circumstances, they do work. Like their mental models, there are circumstances in which they work. You have to tell them, well, it doesn't work here for this reason. And that's oftentimes what I'm telling students most. I get what you're trying to do, but here's why it's not going to work here. And if I can explain it in that way, then they start to be able to predict where that will work and where it won't work. And that's a part of the adaptive process of mental models, which I think is really useful. All right, that's kind of my part. Megan's going to talk a little bit about what we do and how we can help with doing these problems, because this is our expertise. We see these types of problems often. And so we see some of the places in which people do. This is our approach. Now, certainly you can take our approach and start diagnosing what's happening with your students, but we can also help with a lot of that process as well.
And I think there's a lot of various kind of ways of intervention with students, depending on what's going on. And so some of what I'm doing is kind of going through lots of different ways of helping that the librarians can do that sort of hit potentially different sorts of pain points for students. So yeah, and I'm going to be referring to a lot of things we do. smu.edu/infolit is kind of our website that captures all this stuff. So if you want more information about our services or anything, you can find it all from there. Yeah. Okay. So first thing that I want to talk about is subject and course guides. So basically, what are these? And you may kind of be familiar with these. I know a lot of our students are familiar with them. They're basically web pages that we create to help students know how to research within certain disciplines, certain topics, et cetera. It kind of partially helps make research manageable for students and make our website manageable, but we bring in things from outside library resources. We include web pages, we include instructional content on how to do research within a certain area.
Yeah, you can imagine these, continuing the hiking analogy, this is us like scouting the area or offering some trails that are most commonly used. These are places that a lot of people start from. These are really
yeah. So great for helping students understand how to research within a specific discipline. They're set up around all of our departments on campus. We create topic guides as well as course guides. So if you have a specific course that has a research assignment that could benefit from having something like this. And I think Jonathan's going to pull up an example.
Yep. Sorry.
These are also attached to your Canvas course.
Yes, they are. And so I'll show you real quick. Sorry, I see the chat in front of me. So from our main library webpage, I think clicking on research guides is very good. And then this will give you the list of where we start from. You can actually see over here, we also have course guides. If we make you a course guide on your Canvas page, on the library help button on the Canvas page, it will be linked there automatically. So they can go to their course page and then go in and find the course guide. And if we don't have a course guide, we sort of refer it to what do we think is the most relevant research guide.
Yeah. Do you want to pull up one of the subject guides?
Yeah. We'll do, what do you want to do? We'll do psychology.
Yeah, any of them.
That's my go-to. Yeah.
So any psychology course, unless they have a specific course guide that's attached to Canvas, any psychology course, if you click library help within your course, you will see Evelyn's kind of portal to psychology research. And then from there, more specific topic guides. And librarians create these for the students and faculty. So I always tell all my faculty, if there's things you want to see on here, things you want to see us create guides on, all the librarians are very open to suggestions for additions to these.
For sure. Like these are the best bets that answer like 85% of the questions that are out there and some helpful background information. But test and measures is a thing that comes up very often. So we make a topic guide about how to do that specific type of research.
Yeah.
Hopefully this works.
I'll start talking. In fact, you probably didn't need to pull that up because you got to go back to the web anyway.
Yeah,
we are now, as of last spring, we have started to build Canvas modules with the idea of creating content that can be used in Canvas, that you can pull into your course, that is owned by the faculty member once they pull it in their course, to help address some of these foundational understandings that students may need support with. So the goal with the Canvas module is that they are ready-made, they're ready to go. They've got content, they've got quizzes that you can use. And a lot of times we see these as kind of addressing foundational concepts. And so Jonathan's going to pull up where you can find these. There's a list from that infolit, smu.edu/infolit, but if you go into the Commons in Canvas, and you search SMU Library, you'll see all of our blue branded modules that we've built. And if you click into, just go ahead and click into one of them. So here's our basic searching for information online. Students who have never done search, it helps.
Very basic. Yeah.
Very basic. Why do we use library, disciplinary databases and how to do it? How to use the library search function. Can be great for if you have courses in which you have students at many different levels. Maybe you have some freshmen in a 3,000 level course. This would be a great thing just to include as a supportive resource for them. You assign it or not, it's there for them to use. And so from there, if you've never used the Commons, if you want this in your course, you click import download and it just goes right into your course and now it's yours.
Yeah, I mean, to make the connection between mental models, it's like we can assume that maybe people have searched on the internet. We offer some insight on that, and then we sort of start to build out from that. And so these are really built around this idea of exposure to different ways. If you've never even thought of the idea of a search term, this is going to introduce you to that kind of concept and how that might be really helpful. And I would say the other part is you can see that we have, this is a very general one, but we have other ones that get into specific citations and introduction into business research. So this gets into
we'll say we have two we're about to publish very soon. How to find primary sources and how to read a scholarly article. Yeah. Which would have been great for Jonathan and me.
That would have been really
as an undergrad, I would have loved that.
That would have been super helpful.
It would have been helpful for me too.
Yeah. Yeah, but the module thing I think is really effective. And if there are ideas that you have for what modules we could be creating, we are always up to do that. We're getting very good at the process by which we create them, and we're learning a lot on how to do that. But we want them to be relevant, and so we want feedback. on them as well. And we can also offer some suggestions on how to integrate them, what exercises you could do to build off of some of the concepts. We can help with that stuff too.
Yeah, some of those modules do include assignment ideas or for further learning, ideas for further learning beyond the module as well.
Yep.
Okay. We can also support with helping brainstorm around research assignments. And so this is something you would contact your subject librarian throughout test drive the assignment. This is something where librarians would go through and take your assignment and look at it from two perspectives, look at it from the perspective of, from a student perspective, how would a student achieve this, and then look at it from an instructional standpoint of how it's working as a piece of instruction.
Yep.
So research assignments are really complicated. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And it can be helpful even just to have a conversation with somebody else about, this is what I'm trying to do with this assignment, and kind of brainstorm how ways we could maybe make improvements to the assignment, or things that we can do as a library to help support that.
We can also say, if you're seeing certain behaviors, it's like, I don't understand why students are doing this, right? Like, it's like, this is not working and I don't know why, or you just need to like talk to someone else who understands that. Librarians are very good at that. We have lots of thoughts about research assignments because we actually see what happens on the other end, where students come look for that, and we see the experiences that they're having. So sometimes we have some insight that might help to say, well, here's why, what you're asking them to do, it makes sense and what they're looking for, but it feels like they're playing charade. They feel like they're trying to find that one thing and they're not finding it, so they're not able to move on past it or something like that. We're very good at diagnosing some of that stuff.
Sometimes we hear honestly about their experience of the assignment.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have to give them grades, so they'll complain to us a little bit more. Yeah, and so we can do this at any time, and we can also be good at brainstorming ideas, and it can be that you've already assigned something. It's like, I don't know what's happening here, but the papers or the things that they're struggling with aren't working as well. And we're always happy to work with you. And I do think the subject expertise matters a lot, because they know that subject area and they'll be able to anticipate some of the issues that people would have.
And sometimes that can lead to us building things to better support it. It helps us to know, we need to build a research guide to help support this. We need to build a module to help support this.
I should say we also have a formal way in which we do that, in which we have an information literacy stipend where we hand out $1,000 to kind of redo or to make a new version of a research assignment, and we work with a librarian to develop that. And there's a web page on that, and if there's more information you'd like on that, we can send that to you as well.
Yeah, it's linked up. If you go to smu.edu/infolit, there's a link there to the information literacy stipend.
Yep.
So sometimes overcoming mental models is a question of, maybe we need an instruction session around it. So librarians are prepared to, in these days of online learning, we do synchronous Zoom instruction. Sometimes it really helps just to have one-on-one conversations with students, or that combination of, we talk about these things as a class, but then really getting down to, what is this individual student struggling with and how are they thinking about it? So research consultations, a lot of learning occurs in research consultations with librarians, sometimes more even than in class.
Right.
So these are all, for students, all of this is routed through the research guides that are connected to your Canvas course. And there's also, and I'll let Jonathan talk a little bit about Research and Writing Lab.
Yeah, it's a partnership that we have with the Writing Center, in which students can go get help. And so a lot of times students can't identify whether they're having a writing problem or a research problem. So we just offer this sort of one-stop shop that we'll triage it in the direction it's supposed to be. And sometimes writing and research problems bleed into each other. And so we decided with the Writing Center, we offer drop-in sessions. These are different than the bookable consultations. They actually can't book the times, they just show up. And so these are on Zoom. They come in, we meet with them sort of one-on-one about what their issues are. We diagnose whether it's a research or a writing problem, and they go work with the person that's relevant or that's effective for them. So it ends up that I answer some writing questions, and it ends up that the writing tutors can answer some of the basic research questions. But it's a place in which a student doesn't need to self-diagnose what kind of problem they have. They can just say, I have a paper, help, and that's enough. So that's the Research and Writing Lab.
Yeah.
And we also have a chat feature through the library they can chat. We man that up until like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. There's a lot of people that are there and that work on that. And so if they're off campus or whatever, we always have a way. And it is librarians who are on there. So there are always ways in which they can get librarian level support.
Yeah, and I emphasize to students that is the fastest way to get help. And if you are working on this over the weekend and it's due Monday, don't email me, use chat. Yeah, that if you need help now, we have a service that students can get help very quickly. Yeah, and we can screen share on there. We can do other things. There are ways in which I think we can do a lot to help people, but it's a good way to triage. And that, if you have a problem, this is a way to get help immediately when you're having a problem. All right. So I think that's it, right? You guys have any questions for us? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. Yeah, we're here and we're around. So Megan and I, you can find our information on the website. And if you don't know who you're supposed to go to, you don't know the subject librarian, you don't know who else to reach out to, email any of us. Yeah, we're a whole we're like a hive mind. We'll triage you into the place that you need to get to. I will say, like the mental model part, this isn't like, I think there's a lot of we have these ideas of what we would expect good research to look like. And there are reasons why students have a hard time. They would prefer to do it the way that you would want them to do it, but it is challenging because overcoming some of those hurdles along the way. And I would also say that research anxiety is absolutely a thing. And a lot of times students make mistakes that seem like silly or like not very smart mistakes. And it's because they're scared or they don't feel like they know what they're doing. And so they make like silly mistakes along the way. And I oftentimes give the advice to sort of say, just because a student behaves that way doesn't mean they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. It might mean that they're overwhelmed by everything that's happening. And being exposed to a lot of information all at once is a very easy way to get overwhelmed. And I would also say, don't discount how much your content knowledge and your contextual knowledge and your experience helps you to anticipate how to react in a situation. And students are trying to do the same thing. And a little bit of understanding where they're coming from, I think goes a long way in helping students sort of overcome some of those obstacles and actually really become lifelong researchers and develop good relationships with scholarly information and good information that's out there. They don't become scared of it. They start to see it as the tool that it can be for them. That was soapbox done.
I like the soapbox. I just had a question based upon this last part of the conversation. In terms of, I guess, instructions for a research paper assignment, I think what I'm hearing is the more that we give them, the better they can anticipate maybe what we're expecting, which is all good. At the same time, and this may be just a personal bias of mine based upon my previous mental model and things that have influenced me in the way that I work. I fear that giving them too much gives them too many. It does the work for them, and it doesn't promote learning on their own, and just gives them a recipe for, just giving me exact. And so there needs to be some work in. I don't know if even that's the right term of figuring out what it is that is good and having enough openness in order to do what they want rather than rather than a prescription for what I want. Any thought? I guess that's just a thought.
I think you're stating it very well when Jonathan discussed that product versus process. And if you prioritize the product and you're trying to get students just to make that product because it's a good paper to read, you might end up with a list of prescriptive things in an assignment, like you must use these journals and you must use this and this, rather than having those conversations about why we should use scholarly materials, how we even recognize them. So I think it's a process of like breaking down what are the things a student would have to understand and be able to do in order to accomplish that end goal, and then creating learning around those skills and understandings. And some of things that librarians, we create things that help support that. Sometimes it's just having conversations with students, learning in the classroom. So it's an awareness of that, their process. How are they going to move through that process? And so, and then you could potentially build an assignment that is less prescriptive, and yet students can be more successful doing it because you've addressed the learning that's going to take for them to get there.
I think it is useful to anticipate where students might get stuck. I don't think it is useful to write an assignment that tries to help them avoid where they would get stuck. And I think that's the difference, is to say, I'm going to write an assignment and I'm going to know that some students in my class are going to get stuck in these certain areas, but I will hopefully have set them up in a way in which we have a language by which we talk about our research, that when I say, hey, this is what's going on, let's pull out, like, let's have a conversation about what's going on. So I actually think simple assignments are a lot better. And then when you start to get to sort of say, all right, I know what I'm trying to do here, but I'm having trouble with this, you can sort of pull them out. And I do think that they do need to overcome some of that stuff. But I always have the maximum of like hard work for the right reasons. Research will be hard. If you make it artificially hard, it actually doesn't help them later on. But if it's hard in an authentic way to say, this is actually what research is like, it's messy and difficult to make sense of, that's an okay thing. And then you can reflect on what that might mean to you. So I think that would be my answer to that.
Thank you. And
Yep.
and Karen, who wrote on, I really like, breaking down assignments and providing feedback throughout the whole process. I like that as well. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Modeling works really well. Oh, you're experiencing this. This is how I would do this. What other solutions can you come up with? Like, just seeing like getting done is not the point. Having them had those experiences and coming up with strategies to overcome them, that's the point of a research assignment, I think, because it's building capacity to do them again. That's right. It's messy. Which is unfortunate for assignments because they usually happen on a deadline. And so messy doesn't always fit into like, here you have 3 weeks to do this. So I think that can be really difficult.
Well, thank you all for, Gizem says, yes, it has to be, yes, absolutely, Gizem.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you all for being here. And like I said, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help. I think there are a lot of things that before it goes bad, we can sort of anticipate and be ready for.